They had no idea how carefully I'd learned to plan. The barbecue was everything they loved. Sunlit backyard, string lights still fluttering from the party the night before, neighbors wandering through with potato salads and polite smiles. Mom wore her hostess face. Dad was handing out beers like a benevolent king. Kevin had the kids running in circles, smug and untouchable. It was the perfect stage for them to look like a normal, generous family. Perfect, until it wasn't. I arrived with two things tucked under my arm: the binder labeled evidence and a quiet, steady plan. Daniel trailed beside me, eyes soft and steady. My attorney, introduced as a friend who's helping me sort out finances, slipped in by the grill like a shadow. The journalist I'd whispered to earlier was there too, polite, professional, hovering with a camera that didn't flash but recorded everything. When Mom raised a toast about family and generosity, I stood. People glanced up. For a moment I felt small, and then I felt exactly the opposite. Like all the invisible weight I'd carried had condensed into a clear, cold voice. "I have something to share," I said. "It's about honesty and what it looks like in families." I clicked the remote I'd borrowed, and the projector on the patio screen came alive. Instead of vacation photos and kids eating cake, the first slide was the ledger, clear lines, dates, and my name highlighted. Murmurs rippled, slide after slide followed. Hotel receipts from Nice and Paris, credit card charges on the weekends. Mom had told me they were tight, copies of the rent increase letter, emails where Kevin casually thanked them for covering things, and the forwarded draft that revealed their plan in their own words. I watched Mom's smile thin into a mask. Dad's hand went to his face. The attorney spoke next, calm and surgical. He explained, in language that left no room for charm, what the documentation showed: deliberate misallocation of household obligations, a pattern of deception, and possible civil remedies. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The facts did the work. Neighbors I'd quietly coaxed to corroborate details nodded as their short statements scrolled by. A cousin read aloud a text from Kevin thanking me for covering expenses. A friend I'd recruited recorded her memory of movers delivering new furniture the week they claimed to be saving. The audience shifted. Disbelief curdled into embarrassment. Kevin tried to laugh it off, to pull the old "we're family" card. But the camera captured his fingers grazing his phone, the smug captions he'd posted, the receipts that matched his dates. Mom's attempts at tears looked scripted. Dad's excuses sounded small. The journalist's pen moved fast. The attorney suggested mediation and, if necessary, recovery. Someone mentioned freezing questionable transfers until clarified. When it ended, the backyard was quieter, awkwardness hanging like heat haze. People didn't know what to say. Some offered hushed condolences. Others avoided eye contact. The social capital Mom and Dad had traded on for years had evaporated under public scrutiny. Kevin's smugness was replaced by an animal panic. I felt a weight lift. Not because I'd humiliated them, but because truth had been set where it mattered, in front of witnesses, in writing, and on camera. The Lexus of their assumed authority sputtered. The house they'd built on my compliance began to creak. I gathered my binder, tucked it under my arm, and walked through the yard. Behind me, the nets of their excuses trembled and tore. I didn't look back. The fallout would follow them, but the moment itself belonged to me. Precise, inevitable, and irrevocable. The days after the barbecue felt surreal. The house that had once been my prison, full of whispered favoritism, stolen opportunities, and subtle manipulations, was quieter than ever. Mom and Dad avoided calls. Kevin's texts were curt and defensive. The sense of control they had wielded over me for years had crumbled, replaced by a tension that made them walk lightly, speak cautiously, and measure every word around me. I didn't feel victorious in the loud, gloating way. I felt lighter, freer, like a weight that had pressed on my shoulders for years had finally lifted. My rent was no longer a weapon pointed at me. Kevin's freeloading was no longer my problem. And the house that had once seemed suffocating was now irrelevant. I had already moved out, securing my own apartment, my own space, my own rules. The community's reaction surprised me. Friends, neighbors, and relatives reached out, quietly impressed by the precision of my plan and the courage to stand up in front of family without losing composure. Even Daniel's parents, who had witnessed my silent suffering over the years, called to say how proud they were of how I handled the situation. For the first time, I realized respect could be earned without compromising integrity, and it felt intoxicating. Kevin tried to apologize a week later, his words awkward, clumsy, and too late. I read them once, then deleted the message. Mom and Dad sent notes full of excuses, begging for reconciliation, but there was nothing to forgive. What had been broken was not just money or trust. It was the hierarchy they had maintained for decades. I wasn't going back, I focused on myself. I invested in my career, my health, and my independence. The lessons of manipulation, entitlement, and favoritism became tools, not scars. I had learned the power of observation, patience, and timing. I had learned that when others underestimate you, you can use their arrogance against them, quietly, methodically, and without losing your dignity. Sometimes, when I pass by the old house, I catch a glimpse of Mom, Dad, or Kevin, and I feel no anger, only satisfaction. Theirs was a kingdom built on assumptions, and assumptions crumble under scrutiny. They had assumed I would comply, be silent, and continue funding their lifestyle. I proved them wrong, and that, viewers, is poetic justice. The people who think they can manipulate and control often become prisoners of their own arrogance. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or overlooked by someone who assumed they had power over you, share your story in the comments below. Let's hear how you turned the tables, or plan to. And if you want more stories of justice, clever comebacks, and standing up to those who think they can push you around, subscribe. Because sometimes, the loudest victories aren't about shouting. They're about letting the truth speak and watching the arrogance of others collapse in silence. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. I had been cast as the family doormat, a convenient source of cash, and now it was official. My parents had thought they could hide behind their smiles and polite words forever, but the truth was in black and white, and in my hands. And then a thought hit me. They had underestimated me. They had assumed I would comply, quietly absorb the injustice, and continue supporting Kevin without question. But the ledger had given me something they could never take: proof, clarity, and the knowledge that I had been played. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I wasn't just angry. I was awake, focused, and starting to see the path forward. Their betrayal had opened a door to reclaiming my dignity, my money, and my life. And when I walked through it, I would make sure they never underestimated me again. I spent the next few nights staring at the ledger, replaying every interaction with my family in my mind. Every smile, every casual comment about helping Kevin or supporting the kids suddenly felt like a carefully laid trap. My chest ached from betrayal, but slowly, that ache transformed into something sharper, more focused: determination. For years, I had let my parents' favoritism and Kevin's freeloading define my actions. I had smiled, I had obeyed, I had compromised myself in the name of family. But now I realized something crucial. Their power over me existed only because I allowed it. And I no longer would. The trigger came unexpectedly. I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from Kevin, a smug, staged family photo with the caption, "Thanks to Sophie for handling our rent. Couldn't do it without her." It was infuriating. I could feel my blood boil, but alongside the anger came clarity. The audacity of him taking credit, the casual assumption that I would pay for their life, crystallized my resolve. I wasn't going to just simmer in resentment. I wasn't going to silently fund his freeloading lifestyle. I leaned back and made a decision. I wouldn't act recklessly. I wouldn't lash out. Instead, I would be strategic. I would turn their overconfidence into my advantage. I had proof: the ledger, the emails, the carefully documented transactions. I had clarity, Every unfair act mapped out in cold, undeniable facts. And now I had focus, the determination to reclaim my dignity, my finances, and my space. I started outlining a plan. Step 1. Gather every piece of evidence and organize it into a clear, unassailable record. Step 2. Quietly confirm any corroborating details with trusted friends and relatives who had witnessed the favoritism and mismanagement over the years. Step 3. Prepare for the confrontation, one that would be precise, public, and impossible to ignore. Most importantly, I began mentally preparing myself. No longer would I feel small, ignored, or manipulated. I would move from reaction to action, from hurt to calculated strength. Every sleepless night, every pang of resentment had brought me to this moment, ready to step into my own power. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable. Not because of bravado, but because I was armed with truth and determination. They thought they could control me forever, assume my compliance, and parade Kevin's entitlement without consequence. They had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to win. Revenge, I decided, would be surgical, quiet, precise, and impossible to spin away. I wasn't out for melodrama. I wanted a clean unmasking that left no room for excuses. So I built the plan like I used to build budgets for clients. Line items, deadlines, accountable owners. Only this time, the owners were me. Step 1. Catalog everything. I turned the ledger into a timeline. Each entry got a date, a short note, and a scanned copy. Emails were printed. Texts were screenshot in full. Receipts from renovations, weekend trips, and fancy dinners were organized beside the rent increases. If they wanted a scandal, I'd give them incontrovertible facts. Step 2. Secure witnesses. I messaged the few relatives who'd confided quietly over the years. A cousin remembered Kevin bragging about Sophie covering things. A neighbor confirmed seeing the movers bringing in new furniture. And a family friend admitted Mom had managed registry gifts in awkward ways. They didn't owe me loyalty, but when I offered anonymized facts and a calm ask, a few agreed to sign short statements if needed. People don't like being on the wrong side of a paper trail. Step 3. Trace the money. Using a contact from a freelance bookkeeping job, I traced large weekend charges and card receipts to restaurants and hotels that matched the dates in the ledger. I mapped out which accounts paid for Kevin's expenses and which accounts claimed tight budget. Every weird transfer, every strategic hold, fed the pattern. Step 4. Create bait. If Kevin and my parents felt untouchable, they'd be careless. So I wrote a neutral-sounding message asking for scanned receipts so I can sort my tax records. Predictably, Mom forwarded a draft meant for Kevin, an unguarded instruction on how to answer if I asked about specific charges. Vanity and haste are mortal weaknesses. She gave me the admission I didn't need to force. Step 5. Line up authority. I quietly consulted a consumer advocate and an attorney who specialized in family financial disputes. They advised me on how to package documents so they'd be compelling to mediators and embarrassing in public. I also messaged a local lifestyle reporter, anonymously, about misuse of registry gifts, not for clicks, but to ensure scrutiny if litigation became necessary. Step 6. Time the reveal. I picked a moment when their confidence would be highest, the family's big summer barbecue, where everyone gathered, photos would be taken, and neighbors would witness the fallout. The goal wasn't to humiliate for sport. It was to make the truth undeniable in front of people they trusted. All the while, Kevin posted smug selfies. Mom bragged about helping family. They walked around the house like kings in a palace built on assumptions. Their smugness made them sloppy, and that sloppiness would be the thread I pulled. I slept badly, but my resolve never wavered. The folder on my desk, labeled simply evidence, felt heavier every day but also cleaner. Fact, witness, timeline. When the time came, there would be no shouting, no melodrama, just truth laid out like a ledger they couldn't erase. They thought they were in control. I still remember the day my world tilted sideways. Sophie, your brother and his family will be moving in next month. Oh, and by the way, we're raising your rent to $2,500? The words hit me like a sucker punch. My heart froze, then sank, and a slow, simmering anger began to creep through the shock. I had lived in my parents' house for years, contributing responsibly, paying what they had originally asked. But apparently that loyalty didn't matter anymore. My brother, Kevin, the 32-year-old professional excuse maker, and his wife and 2 kids were suddenly the family VIPs, moving in without warning or regard. And me? I was apparently disposable. I am Sophie Palmer, 27, working 2 jobs, living frugally, and trying to save for my own apartment. Kevin is everything I am not: lazy, charming in a self-serving way, and shamelessly entitled. My parents, once my unwavering support, now cheered on his antics and seemed to delight in punishing me financially. It wasn't just a rent hike. It was a declaration: he comes first, you come last. The betrayal stung even more because it wasn't new. Over the years, I had watched him stroll through life collecting handouts, avoiding responsibility, and somehow charming everyone into thinking he deserved it. Meanwhile, I kept quiet, followed the rules, and sacrificed my comfort for the sake of peace. But now, peace had been replaced with manipulation. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, the letter in my hands, my chest tight. The faint sound of Kevin's kids laughing in the backyard, a sound that had once been sweet, now felt like mockery. Mom and Dad didn't even notice the tension. They were busy making arrangements for Kevin's move, discussing which rooms he would take, how the utilities would be split, all while I sat there silently, seething. I tried to reason with them. "I don't have an extra $1,000 a month," I said. "This is unfair." Mom smiled, the kind of polite smile that hides contempt. "Sophie, families help each other. You'll manage. He needs a place, and you'll be fine." Kevin laughed in the background, a careless, self-satisfied chuckle. Something inside me shifted in that moment. I realized they didn't see me as a daughter anymore. I wasn't family in the way I thought I was. I was just convenient. A bank, a roommate, someone to be taken for granted until I couldn't be. And that's when the thought first crossed my mind. Maybe it was time to leave. Maybe the betrayal wasn't just about money. Maybe it was about respect, dignity, my right to be treated like a human being in my own home. I didn't know yet what I would do about Kevin, or my parents, or the life they thought they could control. But one thing was certain: I wouldn't be their doormat forever. Something had shifted, and they had no idea what was coming. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. After all, Kevin needed a place. It wasn't like he'd ever ask for anything on time, and I had no proof that Mom and Dad were deliberately choosing him over me. But the first subtle cracks in the family facade quickly revealed themselves. It started with the small things: phone calls and texts from Mom and Dad that seemed perfectly ordinary but carried a hidden edge. Mom would check in about Kevin's job interviews, his financial planning, and his children's school schedules. Every call carried a subtle message: your focus should be on helping, not questioning. When I mentioned my own bills or struggles, she would smile gently but dismissively, like my problems didn't matter. Then came the little lies. Dad told me they had cut back on their own expenses, tightened the budget to accommodate Kevin's move. A week later, I saw photos online of Mom and Dad enjoying a weekend getaway, expensive dinners, wine tastings, and spa treatments, all while expecting me to pay the new rent without complaint. The hypocrisy stung. I began noticing patterns I hadn't before. Birthday presents for Kevin's kids were always lavish, often extravagant, while mine were practical or late. Kevin got a new laptop and phone before I had finished paying off my own bills. Mom constantly praised him for doing so much for the family, while I was quietly overlooked for years of consistent contribution. It wasn't just favoritism, it was intentional reinforcement, a psychological pattern designed to keep me in my place. The emotional strain began to eat away at me. I felt trapped, like a character in someone else's story. Daniel noticed my mood shift and asked gently, "Are your parents really this unfair?" I nodded, feeling a mixture of shame and anger. "It's not just unfair," I said. "It's manipulative. Kevin's always been the favorite, and now they've made it official. My rent is a weapon, and I'm supposed to comply without question." The more I observed, the more details emerged. Hushed phone calls between Mom and Kevin that quickly ended when I entered the room. Whispered conversations about splitting utilities in a way that didn't include me. And Emily's increasingly smug comments about having everything covered. Each moment was a breadcrumb, small and seemingly insignificant, yet painting a picture of deliberate manipulation. By the end of the week, I was exhausted and furious, but also focused. My anger wasn't chaotic, it was clarifying. Something had shifted inside me. I knew I needed to act, but not impulsively. I had to plan, wait, and prepare for the moment when I could finally reclaim my space, my money, and my dignity. And deep down, I sensed that this betrayal was only the beginning, that what I had witnessed was just a preview of the full story. It all came crashing down one evening when I stumbled across the ledger my parents kept tucked away in a drawer, a detailed record of family finances I had never been allowed to see. My curiosity had been piqued for weeks. After noticing inconsistencies between what Mom and Dad claimed about tight budgets and the extravagant spending on Kevin and his family. Flipping through the pages, my heart sank. Every detail screamed betrayal. There were meticulous records of renovations on Kevin's bedroom, a brand new playroom for his kids, and a line labeled emergency tuition fees, covered by Sophie, with my name highlighted in red. The notes weren't subtle. They planned to raise my rent just enough to cover Kevin's moving expenses, while keeping themselves comfortably afloat on their usual indulgences. And then the emails. I found forwarded messages from Kevin to Mom, casually asking for help with furniture, groceries, and even car payments. Mom's responses were sweetly indulgent, promising coverage while framing it as helping a family in need. Meanwhile, my own expenses were dismissed. "You'll manage," or "you always do." It wasn't oversight. It was strategy. I sank into the couch, staring at the ledger, trembling. Years of sacrifices, late nights, missed opportunities, all of it had been expected, quietly assumed, and now weaponized against me. Kevin wasn't just lazy. He was complicit. My parents weren't just careless. They had deliberately exploited me. A wave of disbelief and rage crashed over me. How had I never seen it before? The constant favoritism, the sly smiles, the quiet manipulations, all pieces of a puzzle I had assumed was just ordinary family dynamics. But no, this was intentional. Every decision, every policy, every excuse had been designed to elevate Kevin while pushing me to the sidelines. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Kevin. "Thanks for covering the rent, sis. You're a lifesaver."